Hi, and welcome to Your Money, Your Taxes, Your Wealth. My name is Jarod Bloom, and I'll be your host. Today we're going to talk about international travel risk management planning. My guest today is Ryan Wilds, Director of International Risk Management at Partners Healthcare. So can you talk a little bit about, first of all, what is international travel risk management and what kind of planning do you do for that?
That's a great question, and it really applies in my job to our business travelers and our employees who are traveling overseas on our behalf. For the tourist traveler or any of us who might go on leisure travel anywhere, it would mean thinking about the kinds of things that you need to be prepared for when you go overseas and travel abroad, because it's very different than your home environment and the kinds of things that you would rely on normally. And so it's good to prepare yourself for the differences that you're going to experience when you are traveling.
Okay, so could you talk a little bit about what those differences would be, especially for somebody traveling, people are traveling for work, but also traveling, like you said, as a tourist?
Yeah. A good way to remember that is something like, who are you, what are you doing, and where are you going? And so an obvious example might be something like, you're passionate about scuba diving and you want to go to the Caymans and have a 2-week scuba diving trip. Mm-hmm. There's a considerable amount of planning that goes into that, and you want to make sure that you have all your equipment and everything's ready. And in the unlikely event that something bad happened, you got sick or injured, what are you going to do about it in that foreign country, and what are the resources available to you, and do you know how to access them in a timely manner, right? For business travelers like our people, most of them are global health workers. They're going overseas to do specific things. So the who are you is healthcare workers. The where are they going? It's usually to developing countries that don't have a lot of resources. And what are they doing there? They're usually doing activities that may place them at a different level of risk than the average business traveler. The example would be they're going to work in a clinic and they're going to take care of patients and do hands-on clinical care. So they really need to be prepared in order to work in that environment safely. For the business traveler, a little bit different might be they're going to go to follow up on some business deals in Asia, and so they want to understand what are some of the things they need to think about when they travel there. In the news lately, a big example that's been causing a lot of conversation is the pollution. So UK, London Heathrow's airport had flights canceled because the pollution was so bad, but that's also a health risk, right? So if you're a business traveler, you need to take that into account. Let's say, for example, that you had mild asthma or severe asthma. Is that really the kind of environment that you should be working in, or should you wait until it blows over? Same thing for China, lots of pollution. So I think those are some of the examples of the differences. So really, who are you, what are you doing, and where are you doing it? And so when you think about it in that sense, there's a little bit of variety and difference between different categories of people and the activities that you're going to engage in.
Okay, so pollution, as an example, is something that we do have here in the U.S. What would be things that when you're traveling internationally that you really need to think about more so than if you were just traveling domestically?
Yeah, probably the biggest one is if you were to get injured or sick, how will you access health care? Who will take care of you? Does the country have the capability to take care of you? And of course, the most extreme example is you're in a place that can't take care of you given whatever threatening situation that you have, and therefore they need to move you from that location to another location. So that's an example where you really want to understand what are you doing and where are you going, and do they have that kind of a capability. So for example, going on safari to sub-Saharan Africa, you'd want to understand Kenya and Tanzania. Do they have good hospitals? Which are those hospitals? How do I get there? You'd want to think about that a little bit. And there's plenty of resources out there that can direct you. This is not something that's terribly difficult. The resources are there. It's just knowing where they are and how to access them.
Okay. So now, in those situations that you mentioned, sometimes people will get travel insurance. So can you talk a little bit about travel insurance, whether people should get them, the companies that are out there that are offering them, what differences there are between the companies and things like that?
Yeah, that's absolutely a great question. So usually when we talk about it with people, whether it's in our business environment for my organization or whether it's an individual traveling on their own, what we want them to think about is you're making an investment in your trip, right? So you're going to spend a considerable amount of money. You probably have a budget for that. And it's really important that you really consider and probably obtain travel insurance in order to protect that investment. But you're not just protecting your investment, you're also protecting yourself in ways. Let me give you an example. If you're a retiree and you're on Medicare or Medicaid and you want to travel to Mexico, those are two government-funded health insurance plans that don't cover you beyond the U.S. border. So as soon as you set foot in another country, you don't have health insurance unless you get a supplemental. So that's a good example where if you were to get sick or injured in that foreign country, that's all on your dime. You're going to have to pay for that. That can be incredibly frightening because who knows what that could mean in terms of a financial risk. So buying the insurance is what helps protect you. Another good example is you're going to go on a Carnival cruise and it's during hurricane season. So you may want to buy trip cancellation or trip insurance in order to protect that financial investment, because a cruise these days is quite expensive and you want to enjoy it, but you don't want to lose your money just simply because an act of God prevents the boat from leaving port or something like that. So that's a good way to protect your investment from that perspective. But the ultimate, and really it's sort of like owning car insurance. We all have owned car insurance. It's required statutorily here. And it protects you, but it also protects injury of other people, either whether you're involved in the accident or somebody else is at fault. In travel accident, it's the same, where if you get into trouble or something happens to you, the costs involved of providing you with care, medical care in a hospital, maybe having to evacuate you to another location, those can be incredibly expensive. An example would be something like in the Caribbean or in Mexico or something, $25,000, $30,000 to transport you back to the United States for care or to be returned to home.
Okay.
If you're over in Africa or other places, it can be upwards of $100,000 or more. So low probability, but high consequence.
Right.
High consequence for more than one reason. One is the financial cost alone, but the second is, you know, your life or your well-being is at risk, and they can't take care of you there. You really need to get somewhere that can take care of you. So that's why it's really important.
So the travel insurance itself will cover the financial costs, but what else will they do in a situation like that?
Yep. Great question. So the beauty of travel insurance is that when you buy it, there's a lot of coverage that you can buy, and it's very cost effective. I've seen some people make trips for a month to Asia and pay something on the order of, you know, $50 to $150 that insures them for the entire time that they're there, both for medical assistance, medical evacuation, sometimes security and security assistance. So there's a whole range of things that they can access. And it's not just the financial side, it's the actual 24/7 hotline. You can pick up the phone, you can call somebody who's going to help you find a pharmacy, find a physician, find that hospital that can take care of you, or give you security advice if something's happened to you, you've been robbed and lost your passport. So there's incredible value both in buying the policy because it has all these services embedded with it.
So do they have people in the countries that you are in, or are they here and then they're coordinating the resources in those countries? Yeah,
that's a good question. So normally the way it works is that you're buying a policy from an insurer, and that insurer will have a recommended vendor that they utilize for what would be described as response services. A group of people who 24/7 monitor the world, answer the phone, and provide assistance to travelers in need. And so a couple of good examples would be, maybe some of the viewers have heard of Global Rescue is a Boston-based provider. They would have global contacts and networks with travel agents, security services. They would have vetted hospitals. So if you said, well, I'm really sick and I'm in Kenya, they would say, yeah, you can go to this hospital, here's how you get there, and then once you get there, call us again, or we're going to call you and we're going to start checking in on you on a regular basis and make sure you're getting the care that you need, or we're going to start making contingency plans to move you from that hospital to somewhere else. So they definitely have these global networks and global reach. Another famous example would be International SOS. They're a famous company that does this. And so sometimes you can go obtain insurance in two ways. You can go directly to the response service provider. You could go to Global Rescue and buy a membership through them, which they then insure. Or you could go to the insurer and buy the product, and then they're going to tell you who their response service providers are. So there's a couple of ways to do it. And in this marketplace, really the traveler has a lot of offer and a lot of things that are available to them that are really cost effective to help protect their trip.
Do you recommend one way or the other, as opposed to going to the Global Rescue type organization versus going to the insurer directly?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that I would recommend people do is that because insurance can have a high degree of complexity, there's a lot of fine print, there's a lot of exclusions, I think it's really important that people, especially their first or second time doing this, is to call the insurer directly or call the response service provider directly and say, this is what I'm doing, this is who I am, this is where I'm going, right? And tell them and walk them through all of your plans. And then they can help you find the most appropriate coverage. A really good example of this is, again, the scuba diving. There's a whole range of insurance products out there that have long lists of exclusions. They won't exclude active sports, so skiing, scuba diving, hang gliding, all of those things. So if that's in your trip itinerary, you're going to want to make sure that that's not an exclusion, that's included. And they'll probably have you pay a little bit more, but that's reasonable because it's a higher risk activity and they want to make sure that you're properly covered for that. And you as the consumer want to make sure you're covered for that as well.
Okay. So can you give us some examples of situations where you've been involved where somebody did have that coverage and how that coverage really helped them out?
Yeah. It's so important that when you buy the coverage that you know how to activate it. So you have the 24/7 hotline. I typically tell people you put it in your cell phone, you get the wallet card, you put it in your wallet, you tell your family, you give it to somebody who's staying behind at home or whatever so everybody knows about it. And that's really good practice and doesn't take any time at all. And then, you know, as you go overseas, in the event that something happens, you pick up that 24/7 hotline and you call into the call center and they begin to do case management and help you and assist you in providing support and or direction about where you need to go and what you need to do. And the beauty of having that service is that they have a vetted system of providers already. So they've already looked at hospitals overseas. They already know which ones are the best ones to go to, depending on what your case is. They already have a list of air ambulances that they would call up and ask if they're available and what the bid is. So there's a whole process behind the scenes that's already been done for you. All you have to do is pick up the phone and call, and that whole system comes into play and it's access to you. The flip side to that is every couple of times a year I get a phone call from somebody who doesn't have insurance and they're in a bad spot. They've either been injured or something has happened to them and now they need to be moved from their location to somewhere else. And it's really, really difficult conversation because if they haven't bought insurance, they're really in trouble because they don't have access to that vetted network necessarily. They don't have the systems already set up. They're going out to what we would call the open marketplace and trying to find basically an air charter to take them from one place to the other. And that's not a good place to be. There's a lot of risk in that. And so much more preferable to, you know, it's the classic example. You spend $1 up front to save $4 on the backside, and I think that that's a good example of it.
Yeah, and you know, you've talked about things that are low probability and high consequence, and that really fits into that category. And it sounds like you could just pay something that's a very reasonable price just to get this level of coverage and protection that you know, should something bad happen to you, you're really going to be thankful that you have this coverage.
Right, and again, it goes back to the overall investment. You know, an average trip might be $2,000 to $3,000, right? If you're talking about going to Europe, certainly Africa would be a little bit more. By the time you total up everything that goes into the trip, and so by adding another, you know, $80 to $200, depending on, you know, who you are and what you're going to do, it seems to be incredibly reasonable to me. And you have that peace of mind. And I think it's not about fear; it's being a more confident and a more prepared traveler, right? And so now you're ready, and if something happens, you have it. You've got all of these people and all these resources on your side for a very nominal fee, whereas if you don't have that, you really are in trouble. And
this isn't just if you're going to go to an exotic place or a third world country. I mean, this is just traveling outside the United States to first world countries, no matter where you are in the world.
That's correct, right. That is absolutely true. Just a quick statistic, there's something like 65 million Americans that make trips overseas every year. The most common cause of injury or death is motor vehicle accident. So it's not terrorism, you know, and it's not something else. It's riding around, getting from point A to point B. So that's something that's somewhat preventable because you can make smart choices about how you're going to move around and wear your seatbelt and those types of things. But that really is one of the principal risks, and that doesn't matter whether you're in Europe or sub-Saharan Africa or South America. So that's one of the things, you know, for people to think about. The other common medical cause for people, self-reported, is gastrointestinal or traveler's diarrhea, as it's commonly called. Something like more than 50% of those millions of travelers self-report that that was one of the things that they suffered overseas. So in the case where you needed advice, a pharmacy or a hospital, you could pick up that 24/7 hotline and ask them, saying, I'm having these issues. Do you know of a good place I can go to get, get help? And they'll help you find that. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you mentioned terrorism, and I think that's on everyone's minds, of course. So I guess I want to ask you, if you're traveling and there is a terrorist situation that happens, that's what's on people's mind, but as you're pointing out, that's very rare or infrequent relative to the other situations that happened when you're traveling and you have a problem come up. So could you talk a little bit about that and what to do in each situation?
Yeah. Yeah, obviously terrorism is a huge problem and it's on the news every single day, and I think the issue with it is it's both, we can look at the statistics, the cold numbers, and they tell a certain story, but there's also an emotional component to it. It's scary, it's, you don't know when it's going to happen, and that's the whole point behind it. So as travelers, sometimes people may make decisions around that fear and decide that they're not going to go someplace. I've talked to many travelers, and post-terrorist attack in Europe, they would cancel their trip and not go. And that's a personal decision, and I think in any case, anybody should be supported in that. But when you look at the cold facts, it's really like 1 in a million or more that somebody would be involved in that kind of an incident. And it's just incredibly rare. But the flip side to that is when you look at some of those attacks in Europe over the last 18 months, there's been an American or Americans, more than one, present, injured, or killed in those. So the statistics, as far-fetched as it may be that you'd be involved in something like that, it's little consolation to those people that have actually been involved in something like that. And so I think part of it is just be prepared. Think about where you're going and know what the risk is. Right now, I took my family to London a year ago. When we look at London's rating, it was severe for terrorist threat. You need to know that going into it, and you accept it or don't. If you're going to be uncomfortable and thinking about it the whole time, well, that's not a vacation, and that's okay. You should find somewhere else to go. But knowing about that beforehand is really important. And then in the event, unlikely event that something does happen, you just need to have a plan in place. Because the first casualty of that kind of an incident are your family back home and other people who are thinking about you, knowing that you're in that location, and they just want to know that you're okay. And so quickly text messaging them is absolutely the best way to notify people that you're okay. But again, Europe is a big place. There's certainly a negative trend there in terms of terrorism, but it's a big place and there's lots of amazing places to go. And I think that taking proper precautions, thinking about who you are and how comfortable you're going to be, you can certainly find something that's going to work for you.
So when you were planning on going to London, you looked into this and saw there was a rating of severe. So where did you look? What resources did you use to find this out? And then what resources were you able to use for your trip, both in planning for it as well as being on the trip?
Yeah. Without a doubt, the first place to go for any traveler is the U.S. Department of State. They have country-specific information that's updated every 6 months on all the countries of the world, and it's written by the diplomats who are posted there, and then also people back at the State Department in Washington. And so those are always up to date, and there's a whole bunch of information in those. It takes about 25 minutes to read, and the information is incredibly valuable. It goes into visas, safety, security, health, the roads, airlines, in-country, all of these things that they've seen from other Americans' experience in that country, and then they put it into a report and feed it back to you. It's incredibly valuable, and that's definitely the first place to start. The other place to go is our Centers for Disease Control, cdc.gov. They have a whole entire travel section as well, and you can plug in who are you, where are you going to go, and what activities are you going to be engaged in. And it'll spit out a report for you about all the particular precautions that you should take before you travel. Incredibly valuable, totally free, and you can do it in about 15 minutes. So some of this doesn't take much time at all. In the case of the European situation or someplace like England, they have their own security service. So you can go to the French National Police, or you can go to the UK Metropolitan Police. You can go to their website, and they often have a section specific to tourists and about the kinds of things that you should pay attention to. And in a place like London, one of the things they talk about is certainly terrorism, because that's a concern of theirs, and they'll give you a rating for it. But more importantly, they're going to tell you, like, hey, we have a problem with pickpocketing, so make sure you try to dress down, don't flash your wealth, and make sure you're taking proper precautions about moving about the city, because that's one of the things that can happen to you. And one of the, outside of a motor vehicle accident, probably the next most likely thing is that petty crime, right?
Okay.
So same thing with other countries in Europe.
So with pickpocketing, for example, that could be a real problem, especially if they manage to get your passport. So could you talk a little bit about options for how to plan with your passport, what types of resources there might be? You've mentioned an app to me. If you could just talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so passport definitely is your most important travel document. You don't want to lose it. The good news is that there's pretty much over 200 embassies, U.S. embassies and missions all throughout the world and just about every country. And it's a relatively straightforward process to go get your passport replaced if it has been lost or stolen. And so the other good thing to do is a mobile app through Custom and Border Protection. And if you go to their website, they have Mobile Pass, which is an app that you download onto your phone. Then you go ahead and upload all of your the details from your passport. You take a photograph of yourself, and so now all of those details are encapsulated in that app on your phone. And you can use it actually to cross back into the United States on your return trip. And lots of travelers report that this is a great tool to use to expedite your passage back in. But then you also have a redundant feature. You have your backup details all in your phone. So if you were to lose your passport, you can simply go and use those details to get another one. Another good trick before the app was just taking photocopies of it and leaving one at home, keeping one with you and separate from your passport as you're traveling about. So just the regular old copy, and then sometimes people email it to themselves. But
Yep.
So those are some of the ways to protect yourself in case you lose your passport.
And then there's the old-fashioned having a money belt, which I know you've talked about that, and you strongly advocate for that as well.
I'm a big believer in the money belt. So right now I have my wallet in my right back pocket. If I were traveling, that's not how I would travel. I typically take my wallet apart. I have photocopies of the credit cards and everything that's in it that's important. Anything I don't need, I leave it behind at home. And then I have a wallet that I use for daily use, but I have a money belt that goes inside my pants, and I keep my money and my passport secure in that way.
Yeah, actually, you had said something interesting once to me about you should have a little bit of money in your wallet, in your pocket, or something that if you are going to be pickpocketed, they actually get a little bit, because then if they got nothing, they might come after you for more. Could you talk a little bit about that approach to it?
Yeah, so that's typically a good strategy for people who travel a lot, is to come up with what we call bait money, or something where you have a wallet that's, you know in your mind that if somebody takes it from you, you're not really losing anything, and you're prepared to lose it, right? It's part of the game that's played. And if somebody were actually to accost you or use a weapon or something like that, then you simply want to, you comply with direction. You're not there to stop that. You're there to get yourself out of that situation as quickly and as safely as possible. And one of the best ways to do that is simply surrender those items that they're asking for in order to get yourself out of it. Because it's an economic crime, and that's what they're looking for. And so you're just going to provide them with that in order to get yourself out of it. And so being prepared for that, highly unlikely, but if it were to happen, that's a good way to do it. And we've had travelers that have lost everything because they had all their, quote, eggs in one basket. They had their passport, their phone, their money, their credit cards, their everything, and that was stolen, and now they're stuck with nothing. And that's really not a pleasant place to be, because that does take some work to wire money to people, get a replacement passport, plus the discomfort with having been through an experience like that is not pleasant. So there's a lot that goes into it, and so if we avoid it or have good practices before that, it helps us get through it a lot better.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about what people should pack before they're going on their trip? And of course it's going to depend on where they're going and maybe what activities they're going to be doing, but could you talk a little bit about what people should be thinking about when they're packing, and maybe some tips on some things that people might not think about but would really be useful to have?
Yeah, and so a good example is if you go back to that CDC example I gave you, where you could go there, type in your who are you, where you're going, and what are you doing, and it gives you this long list. Included in that is a packing list, which is incredibly helpful. And so top of the list would be something like a first aid kit, because I believe it's just so much easier to utilize the things in a first aid kit that you're familiar with and that you've purchased on your own, and you don't have to have a standard first aid kit. You can add or take away anything you'd like, and I think that's a good thing and something to bring along, so that if something happens to you, you at least have that immediate ability to take care of yourself until you need something else. So that's the first one. The second is if you're traveling with medications. That's usually a big deal, and you want to make sure that they're in their original bottle, that they're properly labeled, that you have a note from your physician, And certain controlled substances, if you're traveling abroad with those are the ones you really want to be careful of, because you want to make sure they're an appropriate amount as an individual, that you have the right documentation, that you're very transparent about everything that you have, and that will ease your transition if you happen to get stopped and asked to subject yourself to a search, whether it's U.S. or a foreign immigration body. The other thing is lots of different things that you can use, but some people recommend using a doorstop. You can just buy it at the hardware store, very cheap. You know, it slides under your hotel door, and what we describe as doubling your security, right? Because you're probably going to use the lock and the chain, and so if you add the doorstop underneath, you've just sort of added another layer of security to that door, and I think that that's probably a good example. The other is certain countries may or may not have the same life safety features that we have, and so there's some travel devices like smoke detectors and stuff that might be a good idea. And of course, the longer you travel, the more you might want to employ a device like that, because it does give you that early warning, which is incredibly important in the event that something like that were to happen. And then there's some other fancier alarm devices, very affordable, but they make an audible alarm sound that you can hang on your doorknob of your hotel room or carry in your hand and press the button, and they create a very, very loud shriek. And oftentimes sound can be a very good barrier to a criminal or somebody trying to cause trouble for you. So those are some good things to think about. Yeah.
So now what if your child was traveling internationally? Let's say they're in college and they're going to go do study abroad, or your child's not with you, they're by themselves. What implications are that for international travel as a parent? What can you do, and what should the child be aware of?
Yeah, good question. So study abroad is huge in the United States. I think the numbers are something like maybe 400,000 students a year go abroad and engage in study abroad, and that could be anywhere from, a 2-week tour with the archaeology department all the way up to a year abroad at some foreign institution where they learn the language and be immersed in the culture. And so for parents, there's two critical elements to that. One is their health insurance. Is the student on the parent's health insurance? And does that health insurance cover you for worldwide claims? So in the event the student gets sick and has to go to a foreign hospital and be admitted, how are those costs going to be covered? The other is, if the student has their own health insurance, it would be the same question. Does that health insurance cover that individual for worldwide claims? The second piece of that is what we've already discussed, which is international travel insurance. So, and that's really what some people describe as medical evacuation. But what you really want is to make sure that you can get medical assistance, you can get access to medical advice, you can get access to medical evacuation, and the costs are all covered. So that's a really important piece. So those are really two important pieces to that.
Okay. Well, Ryan, thank you very much for being on the show. There's a lot of interesting information. We could talk about this even more, but I think we're out of time. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you for coming and tuning in to Your Money, Your Taxes, Your Wealth. Thank you.